Hello, my friends. Namaste. Hare Krishna. Today, I wanted to talk about a few things. We'll see how far I get in this video. Might be a little over-ambitious. I want to talk about the recent eclipses in June, the annular solar eclipse, and then in July we had a penumbral eclipse of the moon. And I then also want to talk about the Neowise comet that is visiting our atmosphere in the months of July and August. And then I want to touch on the presidential election and bring that into focus, having looked at these eclipses and the comet. So let us begin with eclipses. Eclipses, of course, as some of you know, are negative occurrences. They are not positive occurrences. Why? Well, I know everybody loves to watch them. They're negative because the luminaries, there are two planets that are known as the luminaries, the sun and the moon. And when they're eclipsed by shadow, and in Vedic astrology, the understanding is the shadow is Rahu or Ketu, directly opposite each other, always 180 degrees. Rahu is the north node of the moon and Ketu is the south node, and you will always see that when eclipses happen, Rahu and Ketu are right there, right close to the luminaries. So let's say a couple things to begin with about solar eclipses. Solar eclipses have a negative effect on the national government, government ministers, officials, government bureaucracies, administrators, top politicians, top business people, religious leaders often, and even famous people such as movie stars. A solar eclipse effects will last for 1 year per hour that the eclipse occurred. Now, a very important point is, wherever you are on the planet, on the globe, then the first thing is, were you able to see the eclipse? Did the eclipse actually, was it visible over your area? Because these are the areas that will be most predominantly affected. So, for example, if an eclipse lasted, and they last different lengths of time over different geographical locations, by the way. So if an eclipse lasted for 3 hours, then that means that this is a solar eclipse. It'll last for 1 year per hour of the eclipse. So subsequently, it would last for 3 years. And this may take many months for the solar eclipse for its effects actually to be felt, because they generally happen a little bit later on. With the lunar eclipse, it will have effects on the common people, the people in general, the home life, family life, women in particular, since Moon is a feminine planet and represents motherhood. Also, the harmony and the happiness that the people of the country are experiencing. Lunar effects last for 1 month per hour of the eclipse. Solar is 1 year, lunar is 1 month. And lunar effects generally occur right after the eclipse has taken place. Let us mention that the solar eclipse occurred on the 21st of June, and it was exactly on the same day as the summer solstice. And the sun was in the sign of Gemini in Vedic astrological calculation and in the constellation of Mrigashira. The sun was at 6 degrees of Gemini. The lunar eclipse, that was the 5th of July, and the lunar eclipse, moon was in the sign of Sagittarius and 19 degrees of Sagittarius, and it was in the constellation of Purvashadha in the Vedic calculation. Okay, so what does it mean? What are we likely to experience because of these recent eclipses? With the solar eclipse, 6 degrees of Gemini, we could have the death of a ruler, which I also talked about in my more recent set of videos on Vedic Astrological Outlook 2020 to 2021. We could have several difficulties for national leaders. Well, I might be overstating the obvious here with all that's going on with the pandemic around the world. There can also be contempt for the country's laws. Well, many of us don't appreciate the lockdown, limitation in travel, and the fact that people that are business owners can't open their businesses. They're not being allowed. Also, there can be problems for government ministers, highly placed persons, and people involved in the arts or who make their living in the arts or who are reliant on grants in order to do their work and their creative work in the arts. Countries will be faced with many calamities due to this solar eclipse. Murders may well be on the rise. There will be strife and dissension among religious adherents, people of different faiths, or people of the same faith. And there will be greater contempt of the laws of God and nature. Interesting one. For the penumbral eclipse, which occurred July 4th to 5th in Sagittarius, this indicates an epidemic, a pestilence, and the spread of that epidemic. Well, it's already here. Could we have another outbreak or a more severe outbreak? Entirely likely, my friends, entirely likely. It can also the eclipse can bring destruction of animals, in particular horses. It can also increase thefts and various social problems, including sex crimes. It would be detrimental to government ministers, business people, also people who wield weapons, such as whom? Soldiers, the police, and also doctors can be negatively affected due to this lunar eclipse. Now, coincidentally, we have a comet, which they call Neowise, and the comet will be in our atmosphere, is in our atmosphere roughly July and August, and it's visible right after sunset. Comet is known to be in Vedic lore as the children of a child of the sun, or the children of the sun. That's what comets are called, because they're around the sun. They don't orbit like planets on the ecliptic. They have their own orbit, but it's around the sun. So, what are the effects of comets in general? In general, comets, again, these are negative occurrences, my friends. These are not positive, and they don't come very often. Very rarely, in fact. The effects are, this comet can incite discord in public affairs. It can cause calamities such as wars, earthquakes, famine, and other violent events. It can bring about the death of rulers and prominent persons. At the risk of repeating myself, which I also did in that last set of videos, it can bring falls from grace for people in powerful positions. Interestingly, here in Ireland, they just finally formulated a government. After February's election, they finally formulated a government in July. Interesting. It's a coalition government made up of 3 parties. One of the ministers who was made a cabinet minister and given that portfolio was fired 2 weeks after he was given that portfolio. There's an example. Now, the comet will pass through Gemini and Cancer predominantly in the zodiac. What might that mean? Conflict and dissension among people. It can bring about discord in public affairs, battles or wars, increased mortality among young people due to disease epidemic, food shortages, famines, destruction of crops, and in particular fruit crops. Now, I talked about the Jupiter 60-year cycle at the beginning of my talk. I think it was in the coronavirus one. Yes, it was. And I discussed that there would be food shortages this year and would be a difficult year. And as you may remember, the lunar year lasts from March of this year till April of next year. 2021, beginning April of next year, the lunar year is going to be a very good year. There will be plenty of rainfall, and it will be a very profitable year. It will be a year of prosperity. Just to remind you, okay? This doesn't go on forever. Okay, let's continue with the negative effects of the comet. Devastating storms may also be brought about, increase in robberies and thefts, and rape and sex crimes. So none of these are very encouraging. I do know that. There's not much I can do about that, but that's how they appear. Now, I thought I would bring in Mr. Trump and Mr. Biden, at least touch on that for you. As I've mentioned before, I predicted all the U.S. elections correctly since 1980, presidential election, should be more clear. So, Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump, he has Sun at 29 degrees of Taurus in the constellation of Mrigashira. Well, that's exactly the constellation that the solar eclipse appeared in, the same lunar constellation. And that is in his 10th house of status, position of authority, career, reputation. That's what the 10th house represents. And he has Sun and Rahu, the shadow, the north node of the moon, also in very close conjunction in the same constellation of Mrigashira. This does not bode well, having had the eclipse right on that point or within the duration of that constellation. It does not look good for him. So there can be a fall. He could be not reelected. I'll say more about that in a minute. Then I'm jumping ahead because there is going to be, I have a lot of notes in front of me here. Make sure I can find it. December 14th of this year, there's going to be another solar eclipse, and it is going to be in the sign of Scorpio. And Sun, Moon, Ketu, Mercury, and Venus will all be together. I mean, that's a lot of planets. That eclipse is going to be in conjunction with Mr. Trump's Moon and Ketu position at his birth in the sign of Scorpio. They are all going to be in the constellation known as Jyeshta, and his Ketu and Moon at his birth are in the constellation known as Jyeshta. So this is going to be a very difficult time for him emotionally. He does have Moon in Scorpio, which means his Moon is debilitated. That means he's not all that emotionally mature. He's very reactive. He can be overly reactive, overly dramatic, and blow things out of proportion. That's the typical reading for Moon in Scorpio. Also, it means he carries the victim or the martyr mentality. The poor me. Oh, this person's attacking me, and that person's attacking me, and they're after me. Well, in effect, that's actually what's happening with him. A lot of people attack him. Now, does that mean because he's in that position, or does that mean that unconsciously he draws that or attracts that to himself because he's a victim martyr by nature? I'll let you decide that. So this is another eclipse right on significant points. First one I mentioned is on his sun, his identity, his status, his position. The next one's on his moon, his emotional well-being, his mental equilibrium, his mental peace, and his emotional state overall. Does not look good for Mr. Trump. I also have Mr. Biden's chart here with me, and he is faring much, much better at this point than Mr. Trump, considering these eclipses. Now, let's just touch on briefly the planetary periods. Mr. Trump is in a major period of Jupiter in his birth chart, a minor period of Saturn. By the time the election rolls around in November, he will be in a sub-period of Rahu, North Node, and that will run from the end of October until about the middle of March for Donald Trump. Not so good. That Rahu sub-period, Rahu in Sun is conjunct. Sun is in his 10th house, as mentioned with Rahu. That's his position, that's his status, and this could be quite a blow to him. And that's the way this looks. Now, it's not enough looking at one, we have to look at the other. Joe Biden will be in a major period of Jupiter, a minor period of Rahu, and a sub-period of Jupiter from September of 2020 until January of 2021. He does have an exalted Jupiter in his 9th house. This man is very fortunate. A lot of stuff happens for him. Doors open, people show up, and things land in his lap. Now, whether he deserves it or not, I'll let you make your own decision on that accord. But being in a major period of Jupiter is highly favorable for him and highly fortunate. Now, it's a major period of Jupiter, a minor period of Rahu, which is in his 10th house, which is not good for his status and his professional circumstances. He has Rahu in the 10th house, same as Trump. And they're both running Rahu periods simultaneously. However, Joe Biden has a sub-period of Jupiter, so this Jupiter is exalted, very powerful, very favorable. He has a major period and a sub, and the Rahu in the middle, in the minor. So he's got a lot of good stuff here, might be enough to offset the Rahu influence that he has in his 10th house of reputation and status and rising to a position of power. There is a concern that Joe Biden will go into Jupiter, Rahu, Saturn from January 1st till May 19th of 2021. Saturn is what's known as a Maraka planet for Joe Biden. Maraka means death inflictor. Certain planets, because of house position or house ownership in Vedic astrology, are known as Maraka or death inflictors. They can bring about the death of somebody when. And anytime that you go through one of those periods, no, of course not. When you've reached the length or the end of your life and the duration of your life, when we've reached the end of that, that's when it typically occurs. So reminding you that we predicted the death of a ruler in the US, looking at the US yearly chart. I mentioned that in these other previous videos. So we could easily have the death of a ruler here, even with Mr. Biden. Now, I'm not predicting that officially. I'm just saying it's pointing in that direction if his lifespan is to come to an end. And he doesn't look like the healthiest guy around. And both of these guys are in their 70s. Interestingly, I also mentioned that somebody could be assassinated in office. I read recently that there were 25 different assassination attempts on President Trump's life. Now, I don't think that should cause you to raise your eyebrows, my friends, because I dare say, because these are not reported publicly, I dare say that happens to every U.S. president. There's lots of assassination attempts that we don't know about, or proclamations of assassination or some such thing, because they don't announce all that to everybody. Trump might have greater enemies, and we may have more attempts in his case. I don't know, frankly. But that is also possible. So a president can die in office from natural causes, or he could theoretically die in office from assassination, according to the U.S. yearly chart, which is in operation from March of this year until April of next year. So am I officially predicting Joe Biden as the winner of the presidential election in the U.S.? No, I'm not. Not yet. Too early. We'll see what unfolds. I generally make that final prediction in the final week, because we also use prashnas or question charts. And when you use question charts, you will find that things change all the time, because the realities and the circumstances change regularly or through overtime. So I hope this has been of some value and interest to you, my friends. We're still in this pandemic, and I know it's been really, really hard on a lot of people. I've talked to a lot of people. At this point, I'm booked a month in advance, so I've been busy talking to a lot of people. I wish you, your loved ones, your family, I wish you health, I wish you happiness, and I hope for all of us that our lives return to normal as soon as possible. Thank you, and take care.